My wife locked the door on me. Neighbor unlocked hers and said, "My bed's available." Wife freaked. "Some doors close, better ones open." Update 3. We sat in comfortable silence for a moment, sipping our drinks. Through the wall I could hear my wife's voice rising and falling, still deep in her mysterious conversation. "Can I ask you something?" my neighbor said. "Shoot. When's the last time she made you feel welcome in your own home?" The question hit harder than I expected. I tried to think of a recent example, something that would prove my marriage wasn't as broken as it was starting to seem. I started then stopped. That's a harder question to answer than it should be. That's not a good sign. No, it's not. She moved slightly closer on the couch, her knee almost touching mine. You know, when my ex used to pull his control stunts, I used to think it was my fault somehow, like I wasn't being understanding enough or supportive enough. How long did that last? Too long, until I realized that the problem wasn't my reaction to his behavior. The problem was his behavior, period. From across the hall came the sound of a door slamming. My wife had apparently finished her call and discovered I wasn't sitting outside like an obedient pet. "Sounds like she's noticed you're not where she left you," my neighbor said with amusement. Almost immediately, there was aggressive knocking on the neighbor's door. "She's got some nerve," my neighbor muttered, but she was smiling as she said it. The knocking continued, more insistent now. "You know," she said, making no move to get up. "We could just ignore it. See how long she's willing to make a fool of herself in the hallway." I had to admit, there was something appealing about that idea. Let her stand out there knocking, getting increasingly frustrated, while I sat here in a warm, welcoming space with an attractive woman who actually seemed to enjoy my company. "What do you think?" she asked. Ready to see what happens when you stop playing her game. The knocking got louder, more desperate. My wife was clearly not used to being ignored. "You know what?" I said, settling back into the couch. "I think I'd like to see exactly that." My neighbor smiled and refilled my glass. "Good choice. The show's just getting started." The knocking eventually stopped, but I could hear my wife pacing in the hallway, her footsteps sharp and agitated against the floor. Every few minutes, she'd try again, alternating between aggressive pounding and what sounded like her ear pressed against the door, trying to hear what was happening inside. "She's really committed to this performance," my neighbor observed, glancing toward the door with amusement. "She's not used to not getting her way immediately," I replied. "Well, she's about to get a crash course in patience." We talked for another hour, and I realized something that should have been obvious, but somehow wasn't. I was enjoying myself. Actually enjoying a conversation with a woman who listened when I spoke, who didn't interrupt every sentence with corrections or criticisms, who seemed genuinely interested in what I had to say. When my neighbor suggested ordering dinner, I didn't hesitate. "Chinese or Italian?" she asked, already reaching for her phone. "Surprise me," I said. "I'm starting to like surprises." She ordered Italian, and when the delivery arrived 30 minutes later, she did something that floored me. She insisted on paying, saying I was her guest. When was the last time my wife had treated me like a guest worth impressing instead of a roommate she barely tolerated? We were just settling down to eat when my wife's voice came through the door, no longer knocking, but actually calling out. "I know you're in there," she said, her voice strained. "This is ridiculous. Come home right now." My neighbor paused with her fork halfway to her mouth. "Come home like you're a child who missed curfew." That's exactly how she sees it, I realized. "And how do you see it?" I looked around her apartment at the candles she'd lit, at the actual cloth napkins she'd set out, at the way she'd plated the takeout food like it was a real dinner instead of just fuel to survive another day. "I see a woman who knows how to make someone feel valued," I said. The smile she gave me was warm and genuine. "Good answer." From the hallway came more pacing, then what sounded like my wife's phone ringing. I could hear her answering it, her voice taking on that sweet, reasonable tone she used when talking to other people. "Yes, I'm fine," she was saying. "Just a small disagreement with my husband. Nothing serious." My neighbor and I exchanged a look. "Small disagreement," I muttered. "She locks me out of my own home, and now it's a small disagreement." "She's managing the narrative," my neighbor said, "probably calling her sister or her mom, getting them to tell her she's right to be upset." She was absolutely correct. I could hear my wife's voice getting more animated, more self-righteous, as whoever was on the other end apparently validated her position. "You know what the real problem is?" my neighbor said, setting down her wine glass. "She's never had to face real consequences for treating you badly." "What do you mean?" "I mean, what's the worst thing that's happened to her when she disrespects you? You get quiet for a day, you sleep on the couch, you have an argument that ends with you apologizing for something that wasn't your fault." I thought about it, and she was right. My wife's bad behavior never actually cost her anything. I always just absorbed it, worked around it, tried to keep the peace. "So what are you suggesting?" "I'm suggesting that maybe it's time she learned that actions have consequences." From the hallway, I heard my wife ending her phone call, then trying our door again, more frantically this time. "She's getting desperate," my neighbor observed. "Good. You really think this is good?" "I think a woman who locks her husband out of his own home, and then throws a tantrum when he finds somewhere else to be, has earned a little desperation." She had a point. My wife had created this situation entirely on her own. She'd made the choice to exclude me, and now she was upset that I'd found somewhere else to go. "There's something else," my neighbor said, her voice softer now. "What's that?" "I've been thinking about asking you over for dinner for months. A real dinner, not takeout." I looked at her, really looked at her. The way the candlelight caught her eyes, the way she'd been nothing but kind and welcoming since the moment we'd met. The contrast with my wife, who treated kindness like a limited resource that had to be carefully rationed, was stark. "Why didn't you?" I asked. "Because you were married and I respect that. But watching how she treats you," she shook her head. "Life's too short to watch good people get mistreated." Now you can watch the fourth part by pressing share and more. My wife locked the door on me, neighbor unlocked hers and said my bed's available. Wife freaked, some doors close, better ones open. Update 4. From outside came the sound of my wife's key in her own door, followed by the slam as she went back into our apartment. A few minutes later my phone started buzzing with texts. "Let me guess," my neighbor said. "She's moved on to digital harassment." I glanced at the messages. They started reasonable and quickly devolved into accusations and demands. "She wants to know where I am and when I'm coming home." I said, "Are you going to tell her?" I looked around her warm, welcoming apartment, then at my phone full of angry messages from the woman who'd locked me out of my own home just hours earlier. "Not yet," I said, turning the phone face down on the table. "I think I'd like to finish this excellent dinner first." My neighbor's smile was radiant. "I was hoping you'd say that." By 10 o'clock my phone had buzzed with 17 texts and 4 missed calls. My wife had progressed from confused to angry to what could only be described as panic. The last message read, "If you don't come home right now, I'm calling the police." "The police?" My neighbor laughed when I showed her. "For what?" "Having dinner with a neighbor. She's losing control of the situation and she knows it." We were sitting closer now, the dinner long finished, sharing a bottle of wine she'd opened. The conversation had moved from my marriage troubles to everything else. Her work, my interests, places we'd traveled, books we'd read. It struck me how long it had been since I'd had a real conversation with my wife about anything beyond logistics and complaints. That's when the pounding started again, but this time it was different. Louder, more frantic, accompanied by my wife's voice calling my name through the door. "Open this door right now," she was shouting. "I know you're in there with her." My neighbor sighed. Well, subtle was never going to last forever. The pounding continued, and now I could hear other doors in the hallway opening. Our neighbors were coming out to see what the commotion was about. "Should we?" I asked, gesturing toward the door. "Oh, absolutely. This is about to get interesting." When we opened the door, my wife was standing there in her pajamas and a robe, her hair disheveled, facing a small audience of curious neighbors. Her face was flushed with anger and embarrassment. "There you are," she said, pointing at me like I was a criminal. "What do you think you're doing? Something you made impossible in our own home." I replied calmly, "That's not the point. You can't just disappear and ignore my calls." "Actually," said Mrs. Chun from down the hall, "he can do whatever he wants. This is quite a scene you're making, dear." My wife spun around, clearly not expecting commentary from the peanut gallery. "This is between my husband and me." "Then maybe keep it between your husband and you," suggested the college kid from 4B. "Some of us have early classes tomorrow." My neighbor stepped forward, and I noticed how poised she looked compared to my wife's frantic appearance. "I invited him for dinner," she said simply, "after he was locked out of his own apartment." Again, the emphasis on again wasn't lost on anyone. A few of the neighbors exchanged glances. "You had no right," my wife snapped. "I had every right to invite a neighbor for dinner. Just like you apparently have the right to lock him out whenever you feel like it." "That's different. That's private, honey," said Mr. Rodriguez from 4A. "Nothing's private when you're screaming in the hallway at 10 p.m. My wife looked around at the faces surrounding her, and I could see the moment she realized how this looked. A woman in her pajamas making a scene in the hallway because her husband had dinner with a neighbor after she locked him out of his own home. "This is insane," she said, but her voice had lost some of its edge. "What's insane?" I said, my voice carrying clearly down the hall. "Is a wife who thinks she can treat her husband like an unwelcome visitor in his own home, and then throw a tantrum when he finds somewhere else to go." I didn't throw a tantrum. The silence that followed was deafening. Even she seemed to realize how that sounded given her current behavior. "Look," said Mrs. Chun kindly. "Maybe you two should talk about this privately, but quietly. Some of us work early shifts." "There's nothing to talk about," my wife said. But she was looking at me when she said it, and there was something desperate in her eyes now. "He needs to come home now." "Actually," my neighbor said, "he doesn't need to do anything. He's a grown man who can make his own decisions about where he spends his evening." My wife turned to her with real venom now. "Stay out of this. This is my marriage. Then maybe try treating it like one instead of a dictatorship." The college kid actually snickered at that, which made my wife's face turn an even deeper shade of red. "You know what?" I said, looking directly at my wife. "I think I'll finish my evening here. We can talk tomorrow when you've calmed down. Don't you dare walk away from me." But I was already turning back toward my neighbor's door. The other neighbors began dispersing, clearly uncomfortable with the escalating drama. "This isn't over," my wife called after me. I paused and turned back to face her. "You're right, it's not, but it's not going to continue like this either." My neighbor opened her door wider and I walked through. As she closed it behind us, I could hear my wife still standing in the hallway. but the fight had gone out of her voice. She was talking to herself now, trying to process what had just happened. "Well," my neighbor said, leaning against the closed door, "that was certainly educational. I'm sorry you got dragged into this. Are you kidding? That was the most entertainment I've had in months," she grinned. Besides, someone needed to see her behavior for what it really is. From the hallway came the sound of my wife's door slamming shut, followed by blessed silence. "Think she learned anything from that?" I asked. My neighbor poured herself another glass of wine. "Oh, she learned something. Whether she learned the right thing remains to be seen. Now you can watch the 5th part by pressing share and more." My wife locked the door on me. Neighbor unlocked hers and said, "My bed's available." Wife freaked. "Some doors close, better ones open." Update 5. I woke up on my neighbor's couch the next morning to the smell of real breakfast being cooked. Not microwave frozen waffles or cereal eaten standing over the sink, but actual eggs and bacon sizzling in a pan. When was the last time I'd woken up to that sound? "Good morning," she said when I appeared in the kitchen doorway. "I hope you like your eggs over easy." "I like them however someone else cooks them," I said, and she laughed. "Low standards. I can work with that." As we ate breakfast together, my phone buzzed with a text from my wife. "We need to talk. I'm sorry about last night." "Let me guess," my neighbor said, noticing my expression. "Apology text. How did you know?" "Because she spent all night realizing how badly she embarrassed herself in front of the neighbors. Now she's in damage control mode." She was right. Of course, my wife's apologies always came after she'd pushed things too far and needed to reset the dynamic before facing real consequences. "Are you going to talk to her?" "Eventually, but not on her timeline." My neighbor smiled approvingly. "Good. Let her sit with the uncertainty for a while." I spent the morning at my neighbor's place, and it was remarkable how normal it felt. She worked from home as a graphic designer, so she set up her laptop at the kitchen table while I read a book from her impressive library. No drama, no tension, just two adults sharing space comfortably. Around noon, there was a soft knock at the door. My wife's voice came through, much quieter than the night before. "I know you're in there. Please, can we just talk?" My neighbor looked at me questioningly. I nodded and went to open the door. My wife stood there looking genuinely contrite, her hair properly done, wearing one of her nicer outfits. She'd clearly put effort into her appearance. "Can we talk privately?" she asked, glancing nervously at my neighbor. "We can talk," I said. Here, in front of her. She's the one who's been treating me with respect lately. I think she's earned the right to hear how this plays out." My wife's face tightened, but she stepped inside when I gestured. "I'm sorry about last night," she began. "I was upset and I overreacted." "Which part are you sorry about? Locking me out, ignoring me for hours, or making a scene in the hallway?" "All of it," she said quickly. "I realize I've been unreasonable lately." "Lately?" She paused, clearly not expecting me to push back on her timeline. "Okay, for a while now. I know I haven't been the best wife." My neighbor was listening quietly from the kitchen, not intruding, but not pretending she couldn't hear either. "What exactly are you proposing?" I asked. "I want you to come home. We can work this out. I'll be more considerate about my phone calls, and we can set up some kind of system." "A system," I repeated flatly. "Yes, so we both know when I need privacy, and you won't feel locked out." There it was. Even in her apology she was still defending her right to exclude me from my own home. She was just offering to give me advance notice. "Let me ask you something," I said. "When you lock me out for your private calls, who exactly are you talking to?" She hesitated just a fraction too long. "Just friends. My sister sometimes. It's not important who." But that hesitation told me everything I needed to know. My neighbor caught it too. I saw her eyebrows raise slightly. "Here's what's going to happen," I said, my voice calm but firm. "I'm not coming home today. Maybe not tomorrow either. I need time to think about whether this marriage is worth saving." "What do you mean?" Panic crept into her voice. "Of course it's worth saving." "Is it? Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you want a roommate who pays half the bills and stays out of your way when convenient. That's not a marriage. That's not fair. What's not fair is being treated like an inconvenience in my own life." My neighbor spoke up then, her voice gentle but clear. "Maybe this is something you two should discuss when you've both had more time to think." My wife turned to her with real hostility. "This is your fault. He was never like this before you started filling his head with ideas." "I didn't fill his head with anything," my neighbor replied calmly. "I just showed him what it feels like to be treated with basic courtesy." The truth of that statement hung in the air like a challenge. "Choose," my wife said suddenly, turning back to me. "Her or me. Right now." The ultimatum was so perfectly typical of her approach to problems. Create a crisis, force an immediate decision, avoid any actual examination of the underlying issues. "You know what?" I said. "I choose respect. I choose being valued. I choose being with someone who sees my presence as a gift, not an obligation." "So you're choosing her." "I'm choosing myself. For the first time in years, I'm choosing what I deserve." My wife stared at me for a long moment, and I could see her processing the fact that her usual tactics weren't working. "Fine," she said finally. "But don't come crawling back when you realize what a mistake you're making." "I won't," I said simply. After she left, my neighbor came over and sat beside me on the couch. "You okay?" she asked. Better than I've been in years actually. Good. Because I meant what I said yesterday about that dinner invitation. A real one this time. I looked at her. This woman who'd shown me more consideration in 2 days than my wife had in 2 years. I'd like that, I said. I'd like that very much. Later that evening as we planned that dinner, I realized something important. I hadn't just ended my marriage. I'd started my life over. And for the first time in years, I was genuinely excited about what came next. Our story has come to an end. If you've made it this far, how about subscribing to our channel? It helps us immensely.